This podcast may contain explicit language. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique grading style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
We also welcome our newest celebrity guest, Twitter X and Instagram movie commentator and occasional writer-contributor for the Movie Friends podcast. Please welcome Scott Cole.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate that long applause. That was nice.
Yes, our studio audience is always vociferous.
I felt like I was a can.
Well, that would have to go on for another 8 minutes.
Yeah.
So, with all first-time guests to the show, we put you through our introduction gauntlet, so to say. So, first off, we'll just ask you, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do, and why you love movies.
I've been a movie fan forever. I when I was a kid, my parents took us to the video store all the time. I would study the boxes of all the VHS. I think I have I've heard of every movie that probably came out in the 1990s because of that. I don't think there's any I don't know. Probably some I haven't seen, but I've seen a lot of them too. So right now I've been writing for the Movie Friends podcast website, and I just finished school I went back to school for software engineering. So I'm looking for a job in that. So that's cool. And I do like Twitter. I'm in a Twitter film club, which is fun. We meet every week and do talk about a new movie. So yeah, that kind of stuff.
Perfect. So then that leads right into our second question. What is your favorite movie and why?
Okay, so there's two prongs to this. The first is my emotional answer is Starman. John Carpenter's Starman is my favorite movie.
Okay.
I think it's his best movie. It's his most different movie, but I love that movie. And it's I think it does for me emotionally what I know it gets compared to E.T. a lot, but I think it really works on me the way E.T. works on other people. I just find it really touching and beautiful. My more intellectual answer is Robert Altman's Nashville.
Okay.
Which I feel weird saying because I live in Nashville, and I kind of hate that that's my favorite movie, living in Nashville, because I feel like people are like, oh, that's original. But I think I would love that movie even if I didn't live here. I love Robert Altman. He's probably my favorite director anyway. But that movie, I think, is just a perfect blending of so many different characters, scenes that feel like they don't really mean anything in the moment, but then at the end, they all kind of work together to build just this perfect quilt that tells you everything you need to know about people in America. So I just really love that movie. So it's hard to pick between those two. Those two are right up there for me, both of those.
You may have to explain Altman to me at some point because I don't know. There's some type of mental block for me with him that I just don't understand the approach he's using or what exactly is there. And we're discussing Nashville and MASH next year. So at some point I have to kind of bite the bullet and try and figure it out, much in the same way that people criticize me for not understanding Paul Thomas Anderson movies.
I will say that for Nashville, the critic for IndieWire wrote a really good thing that I read about Nashville, and the way he described it felt perfect to me because I've seen it 3 times in the theater, which is unusual, but it comes here a lot because Nashville. But he described it as, he said, it's the kind of movie that while you're watching it, you feel like it's the only movie there is and ever should be. It feels perfect while you're in it to me. And that's why I just really like the way. And it also is good to see with an audience because it's there's a lot of music in it. It's good music. And it's just a very you kind of feel everybody lifting at the same time. I don't know. It's hard to explain.
So then I think we've kind of touched on it a little bit already, but what makes a good movie for you?
Mine is a combination of 2 things. I've had a friend before who was very strictly a movie has to have a really good, strong story and plot, which I agree that's good, but I'm also a vibes person. So I can appreciate a movie without a ton of plotting if it has really strong, intense vibes that I respond to or react with. I feel like Chinatown's almost like a perfect mixture of of both. It's got great vibes and it's also got a really good story. But if it's one or the other, I can usually get on board. If it doesn't have either, I'm usually out. That's kind of my, I guess, answer to that. Yeah.
So, without further ado, let's get into tonight's movie. For our 215th episode, we discuss one of the most celebrated mystery neo-noir films ever made, Chinatown from 1974, celebrating its 50th anniversary this week. Directed by Roman Polanski, written by Robert Towne, music by Jerry Goldsmith, starring Jack Nicholson as JJ or Jake Gittes, or Gits, or however it's pronounced multiple times during the film. Faye Dunaway as Evelyn Mulwray, John Huston as Noah Cross, Perry Lopez as Lieutenant Lou Escobar, John Hillerman as Russ Yelburton, Daryl Zwirling as Hollis I. Mulwray, Diane Ladd as Ida Sessions, Roy Jensen as Claude Mulvihill, Roman Polanski as Man with Knife, Dick Bacallion as Detective Loesch, Joe Mantell as Lawrence Walsh, Bruce Glover as Duffy, Nandu Hines as Sophie, James Hong as Khan, Beulah Quo as the maid, Jerry Fujikawa as Gardner, Belinda Palmer as Catherine Cross, Rance Howard as Irate Farmer, and Burt Young as Curly. Recognition for this movie, Chinatown was originally released on June 20th, 1974. The film earned a total of roughly $8.5 million in 1974, finishing in the top 10 for the year, but would finish its theater run with nearly $29 million internationally. Chinatown was met with near-universal critical praise primarily for the screenplay, direction, and acting performances of its two leads, Nicholson and Dunaway. It was nominated for 11 Oscars, Best Picture, Director for Polanski, Actor for Nicholson, Actress for Dunaway, Art Direction, Cinematography, Costume Design, Film Editing, Sound, and Original Score, with Robert Towne winning Best Original Screenplay. It has appeared on the following AFI lists. In 1998, it was on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 19. In 2001, on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills at number 16. In 2003, it was on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains with Noah Cross as a ranked villain at number 16. JJ or Jake Gittes as a nominated hero. In 2005, it was on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes with Forget It, Jake, It's Chinatown, ranked number 74. In 2005 also, it was on AFI's 100 Years of Film Scores at number 9. In 2007, it was on AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition, ranked at 21st. And for 2008, it was on AFI's Top 10 of 10 Mystery Film, ranked as the number 2 mystery film of all time. In 2010, it was ranked the best film of all time by The Guardian. In 2012, the British Film Institute's Sight and Sound poll of the greatest films ever made, it was number 78 among critics and 91st among directors. In 2015, the film ranked 12th on BBC's 100 Greatest American Films list, voted on by film critics from around the world. In 2022, in the update of the Sight and Sound poll that is done every decade of the greatest films ever made, Chinatown was 146th among the critics and 72nd among directors. Chinatown received a sequel in 1990, The Two Jakes, directed by and starring Jack Nicholson, that did not receive nearly the acclaim of the original. In 1991, the film was selected by the Library of Congress for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. Chinatown currently holds a 98% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 92 score on Metacritic, and a 4.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. So as we start each week, Dad, what is your relationship to this film?
Well, this is a film that I have never seen until we watched it this time. I've seen bits, I've seen pieces of it, I've seen scenes from it. I'm aware of it. I knew the plot generally. I'm sorry that I had not seen it before after having watched it now.
Scott, what's your connection to the film or your relationship with it?
I had heard about it forever, but I hadn't seen it until a couple of years ago, and I watched it at home. And I remember liking it, like I thought it was good, but I was sort of like, I'm missing something. I didn't feel the connection with it, like this is a classic.
Right.
And then earlier this year, they brought it back to Regal for the 50th anniversary. That's what it is. And I went to go see it. Something called me back. I was like, I want to see this in the theater. And I was kind of blown away by it, seeing it in the theater. And I think maybe for me, it's something like you have to kind of almost get through the initial, there's a lot of plot in the movie to kind of wade through. You have to get, I feel like once you can kind of get that baseline, then you can start to focus on other stuff in the movie that it does really well. And that's kind of how it's been in my 2 times. Like I watched it the other day again, and I loved it again. So I think every time I watch it, I notice more and more things that are great about it. So I love it now. My first time took a minute though for me to get into it.
I would say that I have a very similar approach to this. I think I watched it the first time when it was 2020 and I was on a movie watch binge of trying to get all these classic films out of the way. It was about the time when I really hunkered down because I had all that extra time in quarantine that everybody did, where I said, okay, I have 20 or so of the AFI films left and a bunch of these best picture winners I want to knock out yet and see how far I can get to actually having watched all of these movies. And so it was high up that list. It's a film I had known about for a long time. Obviously, its connection to Polanski and this probably being, I would think, the film that's most closely associated to him. You might make suggestions for 2 others, one more modern and one much older, of course, that are supposedly classic films or great classic films. But certainly, this is one that was up there. And I'll be honest, until I rewatched it over the weekend, I didn't remember much about the movie other than a very few of the particular plot points. So I remembered spoilers already. If you're waiting for a non-spoilery discussion, this is not the podcast for you. But the incest angle, I remembered that very distinctly. I remember that Cross was very evil and that Faye Dunaway's character dies in the end of the movie. Those were the 3 things that I really remembered. And so I was trying to re-piece together how all of this fit together exactly. So again, I would strongly suggest I was probably focused a lot more on the plot. And by that extension, I didn't focus as much on the periphery or the minutia that is involved in this kind of a movie that has a lot of artistic flair to it that I don't think you realize on first watch through. So I put it upon myself, especially because I asked immediately following the movie, my dad and I watched it together, whether or not he liked it. And he seemed to be blown away by it. Okay, what am I not getting about this film? So I made it upon myself over the last couple of days to slowly, like in 10 or 15-minute chunks, try and carve out. And I probably got about 75% through a second rewatch. And the movie does improve. So I think anybody that is maybe afraid of one of these being one of these dense cultural classics, I would suggest, try and watch it the first time through, see what you think. If it doesn't connect with you right away, you may just need to give it another shot.
Yeah, I think I also I find that it helps me. Everybody doesn't always like this. I like to watch movies with subtitles. This movie, it helps because there's a lot of information being thrown at you fast, and it kind of, if you miss something, it can be important. So I kind of liked having that as a crutch as I watched it to be like, okay, yeah, I'm making sure I'm trying to fit this piece together. And at the end, you'll still have questions. Everything isn't answered really at the end of this movie. I mean, some could argue it is, but I don't think it is. But the thing is, even though it's a lot of plot and it's kind of hard to get through, it is very entertaining and it moves fast. So you're not waiting for things to happen. You're being kind of taken along on the ride and you're kind of not sure where it's going to end up.
I think it answers most of the major questions, but there are a lot of things on the outside, and it does kind of leave you hollow with how it ends as well, which I think is obviously intentional because Polanski changed it originally from the original ending in the script. Very famously had this falling out or this great argument with Robert Towne, and even Towne decades later has now admitted he thinks Polanski was right to change the ending. But it is something that I think is, even for a detective story, is not something that's easily digestible on just a first watch. So then what is the film about?
Well, I would say to me, the whole key of the movie is the ending tied in with how it ties in with the scene of him laying in bed with her after they have sex. So he explains what happened to him when he was working in Chinatown, how he couldn't save someone he wanted to save, and how basically Chinatown was for him, a confusing place where he felt like he didn't have much power or much say over what was happening. It was all kind of slipping through his fingers. And I feel like at the end, you're kind of left with, I mean, obviously with that classic line, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. It's like the cops are in Noah Cross's pocket. You're not going to be able to do anything. There's no, what are you going to do about any of this? It's way over your head. You're in too deep, you know, that sort of thing. So I feel like it leaves me with that corruption is just always going to be there, and you're going to have to just deal with it in a way. Like you're not going to be able to solve it.
Yeah, I think it has a lot of commentary on the levers of power, how people wield them, what somebody, especially because I think it takes a very cynical approach to how one man could supposedly stand up against an entire system that's stacked incredibly against him. Even as much of an operator as Jake is in the course of the film, he's certainly not going to overcome the odds that, even in a sense at that time, when I think that the world was a lot less complicated than it even is now, he was not going to overcome somebody as rich and powerful as Cross based on doing things in a way that had some level of integrity. He was going to have to do something that was maybe a little bit shady. And that, as much as we look at a lot of these private eyes as being somewhat shady, Jake's character just does not really seem very shady. And so by extension, he unfortunately gets placed in the position where he's just up against this entire system. And I think that's the real lasting portion of this movie that I would say ages very well.
Yeah, that ending, I think that's why, in a way, it's so indelible and has lasted for so long, is that downbeat ending, because it's just so, it guts you. Like you said, it leaves you hollow. And I think it lasts, and it's just, I don't think it would have lasted as a movie as well if it had had a happier ending, because at the end, you're just left with just a pit in your stomach. But also the character of JJ is interesting because I think he's kind of a jerk in the movie. like it's interesting. It's like an example early in the movie is when he's taking his assistant is getting the pictures when he thinks that he's investigating a adultery thing. And he brings him back the pictures of what ended up being Mulwray and Noah Cross talking. And he's like, what are these? He's like kind of berating the guy. Like, what is this crap? What are you bringing me? Blah, blah, blah. And it's so funny. It's just like, because when you think about ultimately those pictures are what ends up proving to him that they had a huge conversation and a blow up, which furthers the plot along, because Evelyn thinks they haven't spoken in years and they actually had an argument the day before he killed him or something like that. It's just, but anyway, the way that JJ like spoke to him, I was like, this is kind of, he's being kind of a jackass. He just has little moments. And then of course the joke scene is kind of, it goes on forever, that joke he tells. Yeah, I don't know.
I think the joke is obviously meant to be somewhat awkward and it plays out that way. But looking at it the second time through this rewatch or rewatch or whatever you want to call it here for me, especially when I first started the movie, there were two things that stuck out to me early about his character. One, he doesn't take the last dime of Curly, who says he doesn't know how he's going to pay him. So to me, that's already saying this guy isn't necessarily looking for only money in this entire circumstance. And then he tries to talk out the next client, who he thinks is Evelyn Mulwray, which we know is not. It's Ida Sessions, out of actually trying to pursue this. And so to me, this is a guy who is a little bit above business. He has certain virtues that we look for in, I guess, moral businessmen. Yeah, he's not the most virtuous character, but it's in a brood of vipers that at least you can say he's the mongoose.
You have to think about this. It's a film noir. When I watched this, the first thing that brought back memories to me was Double Indemnity. The pacing, the way the script was presented, how it all unraveled, everything about it. And I mean, that's one of the things that I love. And Double Indemnity is one of my go-to films when I have a chance. But in this particular case, this also comes about at a time when the anti-hero was really becoming prevalent through the late 60s, early 70s. The Dirty Dozen, Dirty Harry, all these people. And they all had redeeming qualities, even though they weren't an anti-hero. And I think that's what Gittes or Gittes is supposed to be in this, which is he's an anti-hero. Yeah, he's a jerk. He was pretty much thrown off the police force. You can imply that. And he's doing this, and it's kind of a seedy type of lifestyle. But yet he comes across as being genuine and decent at times, somebody that can be likable. So I think that's ultimately what brings the complexity of the character and makes you want to root for him, even though he's in a situation where he's doing a type of job or service that is not something people really respect or like. So I think those two aspects of this are there for this. And ultimately the film is about three things. Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely. And second, one guy has an opportunity to make changes or make a difference against power, but ultimately ends up crushed anyway.
Now, I mean, if I could pick on one thing in critiquing that, I'm not sure that he did get kicked off the police force. I would say that it's more likely to me that he left voluntarily after the events of Chinatown.
That might have been, and ultimately that's what the whole point of Chinatown is. You got put into that situation, and because there was so much difference between the cultures, the average police officer didn't understand what was going on, and things just happened that they didn't understand, so they just ignored. And that's ultimately what the whole film is about. There's things you just don't understand, so you have no choice but to ignore them.
It is interesting because he does seem to have an adversarial relationship with Escobar from like the moment they meet in this movie. Like I think I'm trying to think about like whether he was thrown off or not. Like there's something there between them where it didn't end well, it doesn't seem like. But I agree with you. I do like the fact, like, even though I think he's kind of a jerk character, I do like that they added those layers to him because it makes it a lot more interesting. And he's interesting in the way that he's like kind of unflappable. Like you can't shake him. Like after he shows up with the other guys and he's got the cut and he goes, "Oh, what happened?" Like he makes a joke about his nose and he says, "Oh yeah, your wife crossed her legs too fast and like cut my nose." Like he always has a comeback to like, he's never going to end up, you're never going to get the best of him. It feels like ever. He's always got something to come back you with. He's just a very smooth operator that way, which makes him fun to watch.
Well, and I would say that this is the inheritor of what Bogart was to Maltese Falcon, or even to a degree in Casablanca, even though that's not a detective movie. But that kind of slightly vulnerable but stoic exterior that has the quick repartee and the ability to cut people down to size, that you just seemingly have this charismatic quality that I don't see in too many other leading men that have done these types of parts.
And you kind of get the sense as he's developing feelings for Evelyn more and more, when he's getting the feeling that she's lying to him or keeping things from him, it almost starts to become like he's disappointed in her. Like he's like, it feels like he's emotionally invested. Like when they're in that conversation in the car, it looks like he's just like almost wanting to like cry. Like, will you just tell me the truth, please? Like he's like, he loves her. He wants her to just tell him what's going on. So that's kind of interesting too. The way their relationship is very interesting to me in this movie, the way it develops.
Now, obviously, the detective genre or the mystery genre is not new in any regard. It was not 50 years ago, it was not 100 years ago. But what makes this kind of an important chapter in the mystery genre?
The part that to me that's so fascinating is, so this was 74. It's taking place in 37. It's obviously echoing the movies we've been talking about, Double Indemnity, Maltese Falcon. I still look at it and kind of marvel at how incredible the detail was and how they crafted it to make it look the way it looks. I mean, it's just, no movie looks like it. It's just, it feels so much not like the 70s that you're just like in shock. Like it feels authentic. It looks authentic. Everyone's killing it. Production designer, costume designer, cinematographer, everything's working out perfectly. And it's such an interesting throwback, but it's also weird in a sense because it is a throwback to old Hollywood, but it's also kind of smashing up against newer Hollywood because it's throwing in aspects that I would say wouldn't have been or wouldn't have occurred for them to use as plots in previous. Like, I don't know that the incest thing would have necessarily come in as directly as it does in an older Hollywood movie. I could be wrong there, but it feels more blunt, more bleak in a way, especially with the way it ends, that it's almost like old Hollywood meeting new Hollywood in that way, like kind of taking it a step further than it would have been back then.
And I do think this is a reflection of the period in which it's made, where the number one story at the time was the devolving situation of Watergate. You can't really separate out corruption and the levers of power and somebody trying to maneuver things behind the scene with how this was perceived by audiences in the moment that it was released.
I saw a funny quote. Somebody had said Watergate with real water. I thought that was funny.
I think ultimately, though, what makes this important is that it shows that with the right formula, this genre never completely becomes dated. You can bring this particular type of film. I mean, you could turn around, I think, and do this film today with today's actors, and it would be, you'd have to add some stuff to the script and such that would make it more modern yet again. But I think it can be done yet 50 years later, and it's still going to be as poignant.
Well, I mean, you love a different movie that I would say is the successor or the takeoff of this one almost directly for projecting back to a time period around this same time, and that's LA Confidential.
Yes.
That's 25 years forward in how it was made with more modern actors, and yet it's basically involving similar themes, similar time periods, the same geography, more or less. But the mystery genre is still alive and kicking. One of the biggest box office darlings or that kind of came out of nowhere, Knives Out, which we're going to discuss later this year. Glass Onion was a huge hit. Everybody's like talking about all the rumors for who's being cast in the third one, Wake Up Dead Man. It's like we could never get enough completely of these mystery genre thriller type movies. And so I do think that this is important, particularly because I think at a certain point it was going to become too dated to do noir in a very stylistic black and white perspective. But you can take the tone, colorize it, modernize it, and put in similar characters and still make it relevant. And so to me, this is historic from that perspective that says, we can take stuff from the past, we can blend it with some modern stuff, and it's still going to be something people will enjoy and appreciate. It can still be quality and last for however long. All right, so it's come to that time. Unfortunately, we've got to address the elephant in the room.
Yes.
You might be able to say that this is Roman Polanski's most famous film. I think it is intrinsically tied to him in a way no other film is. Rosemary's Baby, while a seminal horror film, just is not quite in the same category as this film is mentioned often among the greatest of all time. And while The Pianist did win awards, he won the Palme d'Or for it, it's just not quite on the same level as this, that which is constantly mentioned with some of the greatest films of all time being one of the greatest decades, greatest film years that we've ever had. If you're not familiar with Roman Polanski, I don't feel like I need to spend gads of time on this. He has not been allowed inside the United States. He's been a fugitive of justice of the United States legal system since 1978, which is within the 5 years after this movie came out. So that will affect maybe some of our scoring later on. But is this film irreparably damaged by its association to him?
I don't think so, but I kind of come from the school of I feel like I'm pretty good at separating art from artist in a way. I know not everybody feels that way, but I feel like the problem with Roman Polanski is that he's a great director who rarely repeats himself. He has all different kinds of movies and they're very different and they're all well made in very different ways. I feel like, I don't know, it takes something away from, I don't feel like it hurts the movie. I feel like the movie can stand on its own despite that. It's harder in this movie because he's in it, but you know what I mean?
I understand completely what you mean. I think it's harder to separate him from a film that he's in, but I think it's still easier to give him less credit and maybe give a little bit more of a pass on this movie as a whole, even though he's got his fingerprints all over it, than we could for Woody Allen on Annie Hall.
Having lived through this period, I can tell you a couple of things. One, the SA situation was not given as much shock value as it is now. People just didn't, it wasn't that it was not considered poor or bad, but people just didn't really pay that close of attention. Second, he gets a little bit of a bump because of his situation, which is He's always tied to the fact that his wife and baby were murdered by the Manson family, and he is considered a tragic figure in and of itself because of that. So he gets a little bit of a bump up. Also, time has passed so much, 50 years on this film. And the fact that the victim in this has come before the court repeatedly and said, I don't want this continuing, just drop everything and let him come back to the United States. Again, this is separated enough that if there was any harm that was associated with it, I think it has dissipated significantly through the years for basically the three reasons I've indicated, but time has let the stench out of the room, if any was there.
Well, I mean, I make the pointed comment about Woody Allen very specifically because I think at least Polanski has in some way dealt with a lot of consequences, whereas I don't think Woody Allen has ever really dealt with the consequences of his actions. And we've only recently started to revisit his movies and how good or classic or anything else they are, especially in the light of what he's accused of, or I think very credibly accused of doing. Maybe that's a little editorializing on my part, but forgive me for that. Whereas I do think, though, that Polanski does somewhat harm the film because not everybody's going to be looking into the details of it. And while it's a great film on most measures, I think there are people that just will not watch this because he's tied to it. I know that there's a rule in my film discussion group, basically book club for movies, that we will not discuss any Polanski films. And I think by extension, we have kind of the same rule over certain other people that have had issues. Now, frankly, that group is pretty liberal to begin with. So I can understand some of that. But there are people I think that won't give this a chance, won't give it multiple tries because of its association to him. And while I think that is somewhat of a tragedy, because I hope to a degree, even though I know that there are times that I struggle myself with separating art from the artist, particularly if they're on screen, this is at least worth the shot given what it says to try and make your own determinations. And I fail to appreciate somebody trying to just not go after something because of its association to one person, even though, again, it's his creation.
I will say that this differs from Woody Allen in the fact that Polanski was actually convicted. He skipped out on bail before he went to sentencing, whereas Woody Allen's never been charged. He's never even been sued for it. So we don't even have civil court action on it. We have allegations. Now, indeed, they may have some plausibility and seem credible. They still have not been tested against any kind of impartial judicial or quasi-judicial process. But I mean, even taking that into account, I think when we were talking to the staff, people had seen the film, knew it was in it, but I don't think any of them had any inkling as to who Roman Polanski was or how he was tied to this film.
I would say one thing too. I think Polanski, in a way, doesn't do himself a ton of favors by. I'm thinking of 4 movies. I'm thinking of Rosemary's Baby, this movie, Death and the Maiden, and Repulsion. All include sexual assault in the movies. So I don't think that helps by him using that as a plot element in so many of his movies. That's just me playing devil's advocate there because like I said, I can separate, but that certainly doesn't do him favors now with what we know, you know?
Well, and I think that's maybe some of the issue that I have with Woody Allen. When you know some of the things that he's accused of doing, you would look at some of his creation in a much different light, and it makes for things that you can't unsee. So maybe that is part of it. I don't know. It's just something, unfortunately, that with this movie, we have to address because the people that most likely are going to be listening to this, welcome Film Bro Nation, will want us to discuss it because we just can't not or gloss over it at all.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a shame because he's actually good and funny in this movie. Like funny in a way like where you're just like, I don't know, he's just kind of goofy in that line, in that role. The line he says and everything about what is it, your nosy kitty cat or whatever. He's strange in the movie. He's strange and quirky in the movie in a way that works for the movie, but you're just like, oh yeah, that kind of takes me out of it.
So, Dad, are you ready to give us some more background on the film? Do you have our plot summary ready for us?
I do. Chinatown, 1974, directed by Roman Polanski, is a masterful blend of noir and tragedy that stands as one of the great achievements in American cinema. The film stars Jack Nicholson as Jake Gittes, a private detective whose specialty is uncovering marital infidelities. When he's hired by a woman claiming to be Evelyn Mulwray, Diane Ladd, to investigate her husband's suspected affair, Gittes is drawn into a labyrinth of deceit, corruption, and murder. Set against the backdrop of 1930s Los Angeles, the plot thickens as Gittes discovers the true Evelyn Mulwray, Faye Dunaway, and realizes he has been duped. The deeper he digs, the more he uncovers a sinister conspiracy involving the water rights and the powerful land magnate Noah Cross, John Huston. Chinatown is not just a detective story. It is a commentary on the corruption and decay that lies beneath the surface of society, a theme that remains relevant to this day. In the end, as the iconic final line suggests, forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown. The film reminds us that some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some wounds never heal.
Thank you. Did you know? After several takes that never looked quite right, Faye Dunaway got annoyed and told Jack Nicholson to actually slap her. He did and felt very guilty for it, despite it being Dunaway's decision. The shot made it into the movie. Did you know? At the time of filming, Jack Nicholson had just embarked on his long-standing relationship with Anjelica Huston. This made his scenes with her father, John Huston, rather uncomfortable, especially as the only time Anjelica was on set was the day they were filming the scene where Noah Cross interrogates Nicholson's character with, "Mr. Gittes, do you sleep with my daughter?"
Yeah.
Did you know? Roman Polanski said that in staying true to the tradition of Raymond Chandler's detective stories, he shot the whole movie from the perspective of the main character. He is in every scene. Did you know? Roman Polanski eliminated Jake Gittes' voiceover narration, which was written in the script, and filmed the movie so that the audience discovered the clues at the same time Gittes did. Did you know? Roman Polanski had been planning to make a film with Jack Nicholson, but hadn't found the right property yet. He actively pursued the script when he learned about it. As luck would have it, Polanski was also producer Robert Evans's first choice for director, as he wanted a European vision of the United States, which he felt would be darker and a little more cynical. Did you know? Faye Dunaway and Roman Polanski were notorious for their on-set arguments. During filming, Polanski pulled out some strands of Dunaway's hair. On another occasion, when she asked him what her character's motivation was, he exploded, saying, "Just say the fucking words. Your salary is your motivation." Did you know? LA's original Chinatown was demolished in 1933 and 36 to make way for Union Station. The current Chinatown, located a few blocks away, opened in 1938. So the only time LA had no official Chinatown was in 1937, the year in which this film is set. And with that, we will take our first break and we will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 216th episode, we welcome back returning guest Terry Bartley of the Most Writers Are Fans podcast, and new guest Adam Freed, a senior film critic at moviearcher.com, to discuss one of the seminal comic book films of all time for its 35th anniversary, Batman from 1989. Directed by Tim Burton, written by Sam Hamm and Walter Scarron, music by Danny Elfman, starring Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton, and Kim Basinger. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. So, before we get too much further, I do have a couple of housekeeping things. One, if you were not aware, our entire Hangover episode is available on YouTube right now. So you can see us in person if you don't want to just listen to our voices. YouTube.com/@Gmote podcast. So you can do that there. Also, before we get too much further, Scott, what is it that you have going on and where can people find you?
Well, this month I am writing a piece about John Waters for Pride Month for Movie Friends podcast website. So I've been watching all of his movies. I was telling you about that. I only have like one more that I have to watch, and I've seen the entire John Waters oeuvre. So I'm going to write a piece about that, and it'll be on the Movie Friends website. I have a piece up about Challengers I was telling you about, which is my favorite movie of the year so far. It was bound to be. I'm a tennis player. I'm a movie guy. So
that explains the US Open hat.
The US Open, yeah. And they even had the logos right in that movie too for the time period. Anyway, yes. So I write occasionally for Movie Friends podcast website. So just look for my stuff there. And normally you can just find me tweeting about movie related stuff at Cole, Scott, all spelled out. My last name, the word comma, and Scott.
Yeah, not the actual comma, but COMMA.
The word comma. Yeah. Exactly.
So, and if you want any information, his links will be available or his handles will be available in our episode description or on the website. There will be clickable links for all of that. So you can find him there. Otherwise, are you ready, Dad? It's time for Ask Dana Anything.
Okay, shoot.
All right. So this comes directly. All of these questions are from our super fan listener, Eliza from Australia.
Okay. All right.
Now, I think we've somewhat danced around this question a little bit before. We've had a couple in a similar vein. But first, Dana, are legal films a genre?
They can be, but it has to be a certain set of qualifying rules. Like 12 Angry Men is presumed innocent, is a legal genre.
Primal Fear.
And
Justice for All.
But some films are not necessarily. Okay. The Judge.
Yeah, I suppose not.
Oh, what's and I'm drawing a blank right off the top of my head. The Paul Newman film.
The Verdict.
The Verdict.
Yeah. The Verdict is a legal film.
It is. It's right on the edge.
It's about a lot of other stuff, though. It's about a lot of stuff.
It's more about him and him dealing with his personal demons than it is about the law.
But there are seminal moments to that entire movie being in the courtroom. Otherwise, you could say A Few Angry Men is not necessarily a legal drama either.
Yeah, but it's about the legal process more than anything. That's the difference.
I generally disagree with the parameters that have been established here. And I would also...
Okay, so when we have Ask Tom Anything, you can opine.
To be fair, it has to be a legal genre, or there has to be a legal genre due to the fact that we already had Military Courtroom Month back on the show, I think 2 seasons ago.
Okay. All right, that's fine. Yes, it is. So, but I would have to spend a little bit of time establishing the parameters, but I think I did a pretty capable job of explaining my distinction on the cuff.
Yeah, I think every genre has to have dividing lines. That's why I've been in this pseudo argument with the Revisionist Almanac on what is or is not a sports film. All right.
Okay.
Number 2. What movie does the best job of portraying a solicitor? That must be Australian for attorney.
Well, they're in the British system. So a solicitor in Britain and throughout the Commonwealth is somebody who actually is involved in the courtroom aspect of it.
I thought that was a barrister, but okay.
Well, okay. Well, maybe it's preparing the case. I can't remember. My common law knowledge escapes me at the moment. To be perfectly honest, I would say it's A Few Good Men. I think that the whole Tom Cruise examination of Nicholson and setting him up so brilliantly probably portrays, as well as any film, what it takes to be a good trial lawyer. There's a lot of acting involved in being a trial lawyer.
I would probably look at two older films as ones that I would have examples of: To Kill a Mockingbird and Anatomy of a Murder, one of which we will have coming up this summer. All right. Question 3. As embarrassing as this will be for me, I have to read it. This was submitted, so we will answer it. Dana, please tell us why you think Tom is single.
It's a two-faceted answer. One, his myopia. He has no inability to sense and tell when a female is actually interested in him. He is completely blind. The number of times where I've had to, after somebody's walked away from the table or the bar, and I had to tell him that you're an idiot, is pretty significant. The other is that, and I'm sure that our fans will find this difficult to believe, but Tom has a tendency to state his opinion and walk all over people. And sometimes that kind of offends women in general.
So what you're saying, what makes me a decent podcaster really doesn't help well to being in a romantic relationship.
You need to learn when you can hang the keys on the peg when you come in from outside.
I'm not sure I understand that metaphor, but okay.
There's times where being argumentative and stating your opinion profusely does not bode well.
Can I just say, I once had a therapist tell me, do you want to be right or do you want to be in a relationship with someone?
Yes, because when you're in a relationship with someone, especially the ones that I've been in, I've seldom been correct.
You got to choose, because you can't always be right and have a good relationship, it feels like.
The sad part of it is that being right for me is kind of like sex. I get as much of an endorphin high off of that.
Oh, that's tricky. I had the first thing too, by the way. I can't ever tell.
You must not have had very good sex.
Do you really want me to go into it?
Is that what she said?
I was given a lot of compliments from my prowess, let's just say. And I was told to give recommendations or tips to some of my friends who were having dead bedroom issues by said relationship.
I see. Okay.
I do not know if this will make it into the final edit or the final cut.
I don't know either, but those comments have left so many potential jokes on the table that I'm just not going to go into.
Oh, if I even went into any of the specifics, my mother would be rolling around. And given that there are people I work with that listen to this show, I don't know how much further I'd be willing to go here.
Good. All right.
Finally, a PS. Please review The Castle from 1997. Apparently, it is an Australian film. Now, I don't think this is for you specifically. I think this is more for the show. And this does have to do with a question she submitted about 2 weeks ago, that when we specified, or we had said that we don't simply deal only in American films, and that we had mentioned Three Idiots and Your Name. And I know we've covered also a couple of Kurosawa films as ones where we've kind of branched out and made determinations that are a little bit broader, changed the definitions of the rubric a little bit more to fit the audiences they were intended for at the time. And I'm sure we'll do the same for Antonioni and Godard and Fellini when we get to that point, if we continue to progress, as long as, we're both still alive, of course. I would imagine that we'll do similar things. But apparently this is a very famous Australian comedy, so I think it would fit under the same lines as what we did Three Idiots on. And normally the course of events would dictate that we do this on anniversaries. So the next anniversary, or the next significant anniversary, wouldn't be until about 2027 in April, I believe. So we do have all of our season, I guess it's 6, scheduled through the end of next year. So it couldn't be probably before that unless it was a specialty episode. But what say you? Is this worthy of being included?
I think so. If I remember right, because I think I'm familiar with this film somewhat. I think Eric Bana's in it.
I don't believe so, no.
Double check.
Oh, no, I guess you are right.
Okay, I was right. It is the film I'm thinking of. And I think since we have a following in Australia, it would make sense to try to add this. And if anything else, we could always do it as a bonus episode. And we could actually think seriously about adding films as bonus episodes here and there for countries that I have larger followings.
You know, it's always amazing to me. The person who doesn't edit or do most of the production of this show is always the first one to be willing to add bonus content.
That's right.
But yes, I would strongly consider it. If we don't get to it until 2027, I will ask our super fan directly. I think she might also be clamoring for potential merch down the road here, since we do have hats and t-shirts and other things, but we just haven't offered them to the general public. It might be worth our while to start trying to figure out what the logistics of something like that might be.
Sure.
We don't have enough of a following that I think that the cost curve would not kick us a little bit in the butt, but, you know, might be something worthwhile discussing here down the line. So thank you again, Eliza, for your questions. And at this point, I will turn to our guest. If you have anything you would like to know about my co-host and his vast experiences in life.
Okay, I will ask you, what do you think about Robert Altman, and particularly Nashville?
I have never seen Nashville.
Okay.
But my first experience with Robert Altman was watching MASH when it was first available on television, the edited versions, and then later on seeing it. What I found, and I've seen several of his other films, his last film, I believe, was Dr. T and the Ladies?
It was one of the last ones. Yeah, Dr. T and the Women was like the third to last. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one of the things I found interesting about him is to some extent, I consider his films to be controlled chaos.
Mm-hmm.
It's like all the characters, the scenes, everything about it's chaotic, but yet he's maintaining control over it as director so that it's all fitting within a pattern or behavioral context. And so I find those entertaining because I think it takes a slice out of normal life more than what a lot of film directors do. A lot of film directors do things and it's more of a linear story, where he admits that people in general are chaotic and that everyone's story is not pristine and clear and clean. Things go on around it that can muddy it up at times. And so to that, I think his style is extremely unique. And I can't think of another director who acts or does anything within the same context that he does. So I have an appreciation for him or of his work for that reason. But I think it is very unique from any other director that I can think of.
Yeah.
I will say that you will get his full thoughts on Nashville, as we will be covering all 5 of the 1975 Best Picture nominees next year on
that's
the
a good
show,
year.
because
Yeah,
it'll be the
that's a good
50th
year.
anniversary. In fact, the first episode of season 6 is Barry Lyndon.
Maybe the best 5 Best Picture lineup ever. Maybe. I was looking at it the other day. I was like, you can't beat this. I don't think that was like all 5 of those movies are pretty much perfect. So it's tough.
Yes, we'll unfortunately be visiting Jaws for the 3rd time if you don't like that movie. I don't know who doesn't, but you know,
Who doesn't?
there's got to be somebody out there that doesn't. But
Jaws again.
the other ones we will be visiting for the first time. So Cuckoo's Nest is in there, and Dog Day Afternoon. You'll get to Nashville. We'll get to Barry Lyndon. So we'll have many things to discuss, and it's one of the few, I would say, classics of the major hits lineup that we have lined up next year, including Gladiator and All About Eve and a revisit of Sunset Boulevard. We've got a lot of stuff planned for you next season, so stay tuned. All right, but let's move back into the show then. We left off at Best Performance. Dad, who do you have down?
I have Nicholson.
I also have Nicholson.
I have John Huston as my best performance. I think he's terrifying in it, and it's terrifying in a different way than most people. He's so quiet and calm, and he's like the ultimate gaslighter. And you guys are talking about gaslight recently. Like in the end scene, she's in the right, but she's screaming and has a gun and pointing at him. He's just like, calm down, everything's fine. Like he's making her look crazy by the way he's so calm toward everything. It's a way like, and then like, I know this was a happy accident I read about while they were filming. Like he wouldn't say his name right. He couldn't say Gittes right. So he kept saying him Gittes. And eventually they just stopped correcting him. They were just like, just let him say it the way he does. And it actually works well for the character because it's just like, this guy doesn't give a shit how you say your name. He's going to call you what he wants to call you. And there's a scene where it's when they're having lunch and the camera's on John Huston's face. Nicholson's behind him eating. And he's telling him that he knows about him having that meeting with Mulwray. And just like the way his face changes subtly as he's realizing what Nicholson knows. I don't know. I think he's just incredible in the movie. So he's my favorite.
Certainly not a bad place to go. I think he's very ruthless in the role, but he's enhanced by a lot of stuff that's off screen so that when you get to on screen, you're wondering how could this person who's seemingly so neutral at best is so significantly evil.
Well, you can point to a lot of major corporate icons who come across as being kind of
Elon
or Bill Gates. I mean, if you ever read any of the stuff about him, how ruthless and conniving he really was, and he does not come across that way when you see an interview of him.
Yeah, Huston has just like this kindly older man quality to him, but it's so weirdly menacing at the same time. It just really throws me off, and I'm always watching it like, how is he doing this? Because like he's freaking me out, but he also seems just like kind of a nice old man. It's a kind of a magic trick of a performance. I don't know.
I think there is a certain layer of confidence on top of what he's doing that he doesn't need to feel out of place. He's never really threatened. And so he doesn't have to get angry. He doesn't have to be rattled because he's always going to have the upper hand. And that comes from somebody who's had probably several decades of just knowing complete and utter power.
Well, it kind of reminds me because I don't see it, but or understand it, but I'm told all the time that I can be rather intimidating, and I don't understand exactly how. But I guess I've been told it's by the way I hold myself and my body language.
Yes, like your inability to smile regularly.
Yeah, the quiet nature of my the way I deal with things that can be rather intimidating because I seem rather unflappable at times.
You mean unsettlingly calm?
Yes.
So circling back to Nicholson, why did you have him, Dad?
It was so obvious when you watch this that this guy was going to be a huge movie star because he was able to do it flawlessly and naturally, and it didn't look like he was acting. He just fell into the character and just became the character without pretense. It was just beautifully done.
The career arc that he has from about 69 through 75 reminds me of a lot of actors as they kind of gradually break through with certain awards type films that they keep just hitting singles, doubles, triples until they finally hit one of those home runs. And even while he still doesn't get best actor for this, and I don't know how we get Harry and Tonto somehow winning over Nicholson in this and Pacino for Godfather Part 2.
Yeah. That's a weird year.
He still gets his reward the following year. And I think in part because they recognized how good he was in this movie, that he's somewhat rewarded for multiple films. Obviously, The Last Detail, 5 easy pieces, his supporting turn in Easy Rider, a film that we're going to discuss here in about a few weeks. And so I think that as things kind of progress and you look at certain other actors that have a similar arc, Similarly, you have other actor progressions through that. But to me, as big as Nicholson has always been, and he's kind of known for his celebrity, point to me the one like truly great popcorn film that he's in where he's just being a star maker that is the entire movie's relying on his charisma. I just don't know if there is such a film. All of his films are various, they're somewhat unhinged, whether you're talking about The Shining or Cuckoo's Nest or even to a degree A Few Good Men, Batman from next week. He just does such odd and varied roles that he's the atypical celebrity superstar or movie star. I've just never really been able to put my finger on exactly why he's the celebrity that he is, even though he's incredibly likable for as difficult a character as this can sometimes be to digest. And I think part of that has to do, you can find evidence of that in this movie. He's extremely charismatic. He seems very comfortable, very confident, very calm through most of it. And he brings kind of a vulnerability that I think has to work on screen. But he's carrying a lot of the weight of the film by being its not necessarily its narrator, obviously, since they eliminated the voiceover, but he's kind of the guy that we're following. He's our POV through the entire movie. And it's designed in such a way that the movie almost hinges completely on him at all times. And without him, I just don't know if there's another person that at the time, would you say that like Robert Redford could do this kind of movie? I just don't think he's quite the same character where you can present a little bit of sleaze, but still be charismatic enough for us to care. Maybe you could do Paul Newman, but he might have been a little too old for this part.
The only film I can think of where Jack is Jack, but it's a toned down, more muted, and it's more star power, is As Good as It Gets.
See, I wouldn't agree with that though, because the entire gimmick of that movie is that he's this very sharp elbowed writer who constantly has quips against everybody, with the obvious one being, how do you write women?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't even say that's toned down, because there are so many examples in that movie where I could say there are extremes of that character. I still think he's incredibly good in it, but I wouldn't say that he's necessarily likable or something else. I guess the most muted version of Jack, where he's just showing up and doing something, is maybe like Broadcast News or Terms of Endearment.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I know what you mean. It feels like he got a reputation for being an actor who's sort of, in a way, like coasted on his persona. But then when you see the movies, he's actually playing characters in all of them. So it doesn't feel that way. The only one, I do like this movie, and I think he's funny for the movie, but he's very over the top in Witches of Eastwick as the devil, as you would have to be.
Yeah.
But he does lean on a lot of Jack Nicholson mannerisms for that. And he is kind of, I mean, but it works for the movie. I mean, it's modulated properly for that movie. So I don't have a problem with it there either. Maybe Wolf. He's a little bit weird in Wolf. I don't know.
I still think he's a good actor, though. And that's the thing.
Oh,
sometimes
yeah.
you have obvious movie stars that rely so much on their charismaticness that they aren't necessarily good actors. To a degree, I know there are a lot of people that think Keanu's kind of that way, that he's not a very good actor, but he's charismatic enough to carry leading performances. I don't necessarily agree with that, but, okay, fine.
I think he's underrated, actually. And he has to be properly used in a movie, I would say. Like, if he's not, it sticks out. Bram Stoker's Dracula, etc. But like in Parenthood, for example, he's like perfectly used, and he's actually really good in that movie and really like touching. So if he's used properly, it works great.
Certainly. And I think he's not universally an army knife. He can't be used in so many different situations. He's not Tom Hanks, who can seemingly fit into a lot of different holes. But, I think there are a lot of actors that you have to find the right part for them. He just happens to be one of them. And I think he's really good right now as being an action lead. And he always somewhat has been. Best secondary performance, I have Polanski. If we're going to give credit for Nicholson for as much as he's carrying the weight of the film by being in every scene, Polanski's fingerprints are almost equally as much on the course of the film, from the cinematography, the design, the tone, the editing, even down to the final ending. I think he has just such a knock-on effect in the course of this movie, how it's perceived and its overall lineage, either negatively or positively, that for me, he's got to be my best secondary. Scott, who do you have?
I think I'm going to go with Faye Dunaway. She's very engaging in the movie in a way that's like, I don't think it's different than everything else I've seen her in. And I agree with, like, I feel like it's similar to Jack Nicholson's trajectory at this point too, where she had started in the late 60s, was kind of ramping up to her Oscar, Bonnie and Clyde, Little Big Man, 3 Days of Condor, this, and then eventually Network, probably one of her better performances. But like, I may like this one more, actually. I just think she's really, really good. You can tell she's carrying a lot the whole movie. She's got a lot of, she's burdened, but she's wearing this false facade of someone who's got it all together. It's interesting that Polanski styled her like his mother, with those drawn on eyebrows and like the like Cupid's bow lips and stuff. Like, that's interesting. I just think she does a really good job of playing the layers of that character as she changes throughout the movie. And then at the end, she's able to like convincingly flip it on him and actually kind of get the upper hand after he's kind of knocked her down. And she's explained what the situation is. She's, like, can you handle it? Like, can you handle what I'm telling you about me and my father? She kind of plays that part well, where she's like, yeah, the power switches in a way. So I think she's great in it. So
I have Polanski also. The pacing, the style, the overall composition of how the film was done and shot and everything just make it such a stylistic beauty that I had to go that route. Now, I'll go ahead with my most charismatic right away, because I have Faye Dunaway for that. Scott's comments pretty much are the same as what I would be making, which is I went with most charismatic because I think she adds what's a rather kind of seedy thing. She kind of seems like a ray of light in the middle of all this, until you realize that ray of light is burning bright because it's a white hot mess.
I don't remember the last time you and I have matched on all three of these categories. I also have Faye Dunaway, but it's for a very simple reason. If you go back to our network episode, I would say that it is no secret that I am not a particular Faye Dunaway fan. While I can respect her as an actress, obviously, I have always had difficulty with her just on a charismatic level. I found her to actually be somewhat likable in this film. And so, because this is by far the most I've ever liked her in a single film, she is my most charismatic.
Yeah. She's very sympathetic in this movie.
Yes, I think that's got to be part of it. There doesn't seem to be the hard edges that she has in Network, or even to an extent Bonnie and Clyde, where I have some difficulty with her. But
or playing Joan Crawford. Those are some hard edges in that movie too. And Mommy Dearest.
Yeah.
So my most charismatic, I picked two characters, which are the very specific characters of the annoyed office workers. I'm going with Yal Burton's secretary. She's so annoyed by him when he comes in and he's whistling and trying to wait for him. And she's just like answering him, but she's looking down, trying to work. Like, she's making it so obvious she doesn't want him there. Then the second part of that is the guy working behind the desk at the Hall of Records. He's also very annoyed by him, doesn't want to give him a ruler. He's tired of him asking questions. I just think Polanski cast those parts, those bit parts so well that I had to call them out because they made me laugh. I was just like, it was funny to me how amusing they were just being annoyed by him.
So that takes us to best scene then. For nominees, I will start off with The Real Mrs. Mulwray. And that's the reveal when Faye Dunaway comes in, and the joke that we've referenced before already. Then I have The Lunch with Cross, so we jump forward quite a bit in time, but I think that's the introduction of Huston's character. I think that's an important scene to the film. Then I have Catherine, which is, this could go in multiple different routes. You could take this as being the scene where he follows her and then looks in the window and sees this young girl, obviously being the person that we think is the person that Mulwray was having the affair with. But then also you could say the sister versus daughter situation. So I'll take the latter of the two, where he's confronting Evelyn about whether or not she's actually her sister, and then she confesses that it's both her sister and her daughter. That to me is an important scene. Escape at Curly's, just because I like kind of the ingenuity that he had to direct him to Curly's, then is entering through the front door, exits through the back. No one's the wiser, buys some time. It's just one of those great little private eye moments where you see him in film, and I just always get a kick out of something like that. Then I have the final scene, Chinatown. Did I miss anything or anything that either of you would like to add?
I also wrote down the first scene where he's attacked, just because I feel like it's important in the movie, because it like really shocks you into realizing what the stakes are suddenly, like that it's more serious than you realize. And it's just so famous with the nose cutting and everything. I would like to say real quick about that. Movies a lot of times will like kind of brush over injuries in a way that, like, I feel like this movie and Fargo both get this right. Like, the wound looks painful. It looks like he has to deal with it the whole rest of the movie. It doesn't go away. It's still there and it's annoying. He talks about that. It's annoying when he breathes. And then, like, bandage is like comically large. It opens back up at one point. She has to clean it up. It just reminded me of Fargo when he gets shot in the face, and he has to deal with that the rest of the movie. It's like, this is an actual problem. And I like how realistic that violence is. But I think that scene is just so important because it shows what he's up against in a way that's like sudden. And you're just like, it's early in the movie too. So you're like, wow, okay, this is intense.
Okay. Did anything for you, Dad?
The whole series, kind of a montage that I referred to as the water release. And the reason I point that out is because it helps build your confusion in the film. Like, you're wondering, like, what the heck is going on? Because I can't figure this out. It puts you into Gittes' shoes, trying to unwind this series of things that you don't get and you don't understand how they're all related. And so to me, that's an important series in the film, because I think it builds up the drama and makes the payoff of the starting to understand what's going on much more enjoyable.
Okay. So, out of the following nominees: Water Release, The Real Mrs. Mulwray, Jake Attacked, Lunch with Cross, Catherine, parenthetical Sister versus Daughter, Escape at Curly's, and Chinatown, what is the best scene?
Well, I'll have The Real Mrs. Mulwray. I think that is a turning point in the film, because everything is going one direction, then all of a sudden it takes 180 degrees and you're like completely confused as to what's exactly going on.
I would be tempted to go in that route as well, but there's just a part of me that, whether it's Heat or The Dark Knight, the scene where you have the titular hero and the villain kind of mano y mano always will get to me. So I'll have Lunch with Cross. I do think there's a lot of unpacking from just that scene that you could do an entire film class on. So I think that, from a quality standpoint, the quality of the two actors, how many things that are under the surface there, I just think it's a wonderfully quality scene.
I'm going to go with Chinatown, because I think the way it's directed, especially, is like really interesting. And like the way the camera is like circling the car with them the whole time. And it's like right in the middle of the mob of people. It just is so visceral, and like there's so much happening. And the way the camera becomes like a protagonist sort of in the middle of this group, this huge situations going on with everybody. I just think it's ends so well that I can't, it's like a perfect ending to me. So I got to go with that one.
And then for favorite scene, I also have the Lunch with Cross. I find there's so much there to unpack that I could revisit that multiple times over. Scott, what did you have for favorite?
Yeah, mine was Chinatown. That ending in Chinatown is just so perfectly done, and I really loved. I just love the way it wraps up. I love you hear that quote all the time. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown. But I just think that's a perfect ending to the movie, and the music comes in, and the way it slowly fades back. I don't know. I just love that ending, so I got to go with that.
For me, I have Lunch with Cross. Just the the hidden meanings of things. Like, I always believe that it should come with the head still attached. In other words, it's like implying that maybe a dead fish comes back with the head attached, but my opponents will not. So I just thought that was packed in a very short period of time. It was like a fencing duel.
Certainly. And I would completely agree with that. As far as most indelible, for me, it's the ending. It leaves in such a sour note that it's hard not to think of anything else when you've thought of this movie.
Yeah. Agreed.
I may have like a issue with nose trauma that I'm figuring out during this podcast, but whenever I think of this movie, I think of him getting his nose cut. And it's just that moment sticks to me. I have trouble watching it, honestly. I'm kind of like looking away when it happens. That just moment, for some reason, is always stuck in my head and I can't ever shake it.
Yeah.
And then he says it hurts only when I breathe, and you're just like, God, that's so painful. I can't even, that seems awful.
All right. Well, that's going to take us to our second commercial break. We will be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley Rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmote podcast and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That is the grades we've done so far for all 197 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Also, you can follow each individual episode on our website as well. That has the notes for each individual episode with all of our scores, category nominations, and the individual factoids for each episode of this show. Just click the link in the episode description of this episode or go to ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmote podcast to find that. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. William Russell, 99. English actor. Doctor Who, The Adventure of Sir Lancelot, The Great Escape, Superman. Holds the Guinness World Record for longest gap between appearances on the same TV show for Doctor Who.
1965, and then wasn't on the show again until 2022.
Wow. Betty Ann Rees, 81, American actress, Unholy Rollers and Sugar Hill. Jeanette Charles, 96, British actress. National Lampoon's European Vacation, The Naked Gun, Austin Powers in Goldmember, famously known for her look-alike roles of Queen Elizabeth II.
It is rather uncanny. And again, you can find all of the linked obituaries on our website in the In Memoriam section for this particular episode. But we commemorate these here for their contributions to the arts with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. Okay, let's go to best funniest lines. I don't know if there's a ton of funny lines in this one, but there are a few. And I will start with the most obvious. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
I've got, I like when Mrs. Sessions calls him and she says, "Are you alone?" And Jake says, "Isn't everyone?" I thought that was a good line.
Loesch, what happened to your nose, Gittes? Somebody slam a bedroom window on it? Gittes, nope, your wife got excited. She crossed her legs a little too quick. You understand what I mean, pal?
Why are you doing it? How much better can you eat? What could you buy that you can't already afford? Cross. The future, Mr. Gittes. The future.
This is Noah Cross. Politicians, ugly buildings, and whores all get respectable if they last long enough.
Yeah. Gittes. Mrs. Mulwray. I goddamn near lost my nose, and I like it. I like breathing through it. And I still think you're hiding something.
Evelyn. Hollis seems to think you're an innocent man. Jake. Well, I've been accused of a lot of things before, Mrs. Mulwray, but never that.
This is a Jake quote. He says, "To tell you the truth, I lied a little." I like that.
Noah Cross. Either you bring the water to LA or you bring LA to the water.
My last one. Escobar. Isn't that your phone number? Gittes. Is it? I forget. I don't call myself that often.
I had Morty, the medical examiner, when he's like, we found water in his lungs in the middle of a drought. Then he kind of laughs and goes, only in LA.
All right, Dad, do you have any left?
I'm out.
I'm out as well. Our guest, do you still have any to go?
That was it. That's
okay,
all.
Perfect. All right, so that takes us to the Stanley rubric. That would be legacy is up first. And for a reminder for anyone who is new to the show, this is where we measure the legacy of a film and all of its intangible qualities, permeations through culture, how it's perceived in the industry and the audience over the last however many years since the 5-year mark after it went out of theaters. So, was first released for that matter. So that would be about roughly 1979 forward. What is the legacy of this film? We divide this category into 2 parts, 5 and 5, for a total of 10. And we divide that between how the industry perceives its legacy and how the audience perceives its legacy. So, Dad, so as not to put our guest right on the spot right away, what is your choice, first or second?
Oh, I will go second.
So to lead off, I know that this film is taught in film classes from multiple different perspectives. I think first and foremost, apparently the script is still legendary in the industry. It is included in many of the greatest lists that we mentioned before. I think I read off probably at least like 15 different things that it's been in the AFI and the Guardian and Sight and Sound and all of these other places. So it's hard not to say that the industry still has reverence for the movie, even if I don't necessarily think the general population is as familiar with the film, its themes, maybe any of the quotes, the characters, other than their relationship to people who might have been tangentially part of the movie from their other stuff. Like, obviously, I think people know Jack Nicholson, but from other things, not necessarily from Chinatown in the general population. And while this shot Jack Nicholson into, I would say, the next level of the superstar or movie star actor, some of the star quality that was made at the time, whether that be Polanski or Nicholson, has faded somewhat from the public purview, given that Nicholson hasn't had a performance in, I guess, what was the bucket list, 2007. So we're talking 17 years. And the only film before that was The Departed. And even as big as that film is, he's just not as part of the popular culture as he once was. Similarly, Polanski, due to his many issues or his legal issues, is not the hot director he was when he originally made this. And while I think the industry still has reverence for both of those, for the historic things that they did and achieved, not only through this movie, but in their other work, I just don't know if this is the same as some other movies that they probably hold in a little bit higher esteem. So right now I come down at about a 4.5 for the industry. I have a 3.5 for the public, because I think while most of the film nerd community probably has or knows of the film, it might have leaked only maybe slightly into what I term the normie world. And that would be just the casual film fans, the people that are probably going to Die Hard, but aren't necessarily going to Everything Everywhere All at Once, just to throw out a random film. Or I guess The English Patient is the more relevant film from that time era, since there was a Seinfeld episode on that. So I have an 8 overall.
For me, I have the industry at 4. I think it did launch Nicholson as a true leading man that could carry a film, but it gets a little bit down for me because of Polanski. And as far as legacy, I just don't think this film ever really connected with the public in general. I mean, it's a film that people know, but I think as time has lapsed, it has fallen even further down the chain of what people remember. So I gave it a 3 for the public for legacy. So I have a 7 overall.
Okay, Scott. Now that you've heard where we come at this from, what say you?
So I landed at a 4 for the industry. meaning that I understand that it's widely considered great and a classic and it's on AFI lists, but I wouldn't give it a perfect score because it also feels like movies have gotten so far away from this sort of quality and style that it feels like it hasn't entirely lasted in an inspirational way for filmmakers the way I wish it would have. In fact, I think about like you can imagine in the 80s after this, they would have probably cut all the stuff about the water and said it wasn't sexy enough. It wasn't dangerous enough. They would have tried to change a lot of the things that make this movie great. So, and then as far as the public, I'm kind of in agreement with what Dana said. I'm at 3.5, but I wonder if younger people are really even that familiar with it. I feel like when I was younger, I would hear it referenced and quoted a lot more, like Forget It, Jake, it's Chinatown, that sort of thing. But I don't know if it's lasted as long in the public's consciousness. Also, that may have something to do with what I was talking about earlier, which is that it took me more than one viewing to click with it. And I don't know if audiences are that patient sometimes to rewatch things over and over again to kind of get what you can really get out of it. But I'm a total of 7.5.
Perfect, because that's going to be, I believe, our average.
Cool.
Yes.
So that takes us to impact and significance. Dad, would you like to lead here?
Yes. I think in the moment, the fact that it was so highly acclaimed and nominated and such, it didn't win a ton of awards.
It won 1 Academy Award.
Yeah. So I think for the industry, I think it was really deemed pretty substantial, but it wasn't as highly regarded as other films. So I'm going to go with a 4.5 for the industry. And this was not that well liked by the public. It was the 19th highest grossing film of 1974.
Well, how to put this? I know that if you just generally look it up, it might be listed as 19th, but there is weird accounting, and Variety had it supposedly as like the 8th highest grossing film of that particular year. It's tough to say where it exactly placed.
Okay,
So
but
just if that makes a difference for you.
it doesn't, it doesn't. But here, or I have the list here of the films and the grossing films. Can you name any of the films? If say that it is indeed 19, which films grossed more that year than Chinatown?
Well, The Godfather Part 2.
Yep, that's listed as being 6th.
2 films that we've discussed on the show multiple times, Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein.
1 and 4.
The Longest Yard, the original.
Yep, with Burt Reynolds, that's 9th.
The oddly nominated for multiple things, Murder on the Orient Express.
Yes, 10th.
Including, wasn't that Ingrid Bergman's 3rd win?
It was.
Benji.
Yes.
And a movie that I have yet to understand why it was a big deal at the time, but apparently it was like one of the biggest movies, Towering Inferno.
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Yes.
Didn't that get a Best Picture nomination too?
It did.
Yeah. Crazy.
Had a ton of stars in it. Irwin Allen book. I think he may have done the screenplay, but it had Fred Astaire in it and all kinds of them. Yeah, that was number 2 overall.
But I mean, it's kind of an odd year given that Death Wish, which is a film that I think lived on cable forever, was supposedly just behind it. You have a Bond film that wasn't like hugely successful, but is still one that's in the repertoire and constantly shown on cable. Behind it, The Man with the Golden Gun. The Front Page, the remake of this, is somewhere in here. We have Spielberg's first film, The Sugarland Express, if you don't count Duel as being his first film. You have The Conversation, which is also held in very high esteem and was nominated for Best Picture here. So I think it's kind of an odd movie year to really assess just purely based on box office.
I know. Also on this list, Airport 75.
Earthquake.
Yes.
Like, was this the disaster film year?
Yes, those were huge because the Poseidon Adventure was right around this time frame too. Might have been the 73, actually. The Life and Times of Grizzly Adams. Herbie Rides Again. Herbie the Love Book. Benji, about a dog that gets lost and has to find its way home. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. The Great Gatsby. Anyway, I have 3.5 for the public because I think in the initial release, it was more popular than it was over the long haul. So that gives me a 8 overall.
Again, we're not so very far apart. For me, I have about a 4.5, which I believe is similar to yours. Crowning achievement for Nicholson and Polanski at the time. I do think it is a little bit outshone in the context of the following year, Jack's true triumph being Cuckoo's Nest. So that might damper some of the effect of this one had it really truly stood out on its own. It also gets dinged a little bit for the fact that Polanski, before the 5 years is up, is a fugitive of justice. And this makes, I think, the film in some regards a little bit more radioactive. But on an audience side, it makes Jack into a household name. It had a ton of awards and nominations back at a time when the Oscars was one of the biggest telecasts of the entire year. And I don't think it was a box office bomb. So I'm going to go with a 4.5 for the industry, 4 for the audience. I have an 8.5.
I have basically the same. I have 4.5 for industry, as it was obviously nominated for a ton of Oscars. It won screenplay. It, as we talked about, was sort of the ramp up in both Nicholson and Dunaway winning their Oscars over the next 2 years. And it was so well received by critics. Interestingly, I'm a big Siskel and Ebert fan and head, and I know all about their stuff. And Siskel gave this a bad review when it first came out, which is incredible. I read it online. You can read it. It's like got the newspaper clipping image. Gave it 2.5 out of 4. Said it was tedious, criticized the costumes, the look of it, all this horrible stuff. But the funny thing about it is years later, whenever they talk about the movie, when the show moved on to the 80s and 90s, he would always talk about how great it was. So obviously he changed his mind, which is good. But
He needed that second viewing.
he needed that. Exactly. That's the thing. In the years immediately following, though, the movie, I think it was high in the industry's consciousness as a very high benchmark. And until the end of that 5-year run, Polanski probably couldn't have been better regarded right after the movie for a little while. And then I also said 4 for the public because I think I read the same thing you read about Variety. I thought it did pretty well at the box office. I'd heard the top 10 thing too. So I thought it did a little bit better. So I put it as 4 for the public. And then I was thinking about how, well, actually, this is a bit later. It got referenced a lot in pop culture, but that actually has more to do with legacy. So, but yeah, I'm at an 8.5 total.
So that's an 8.33 average between the three of us. Let's go to Novelty. Scott, do you feel like you have a handle on Novelty to lead us off?
Yeah, I think I can do it. I gave it a 3.5 for originality. And the reason why I say that is because while it is great, it is a throwback that obviously falls into the confines of having to follow a very specific set of rules and style to evoke the film noir that it's going for. I do like that they bring some things into the story, but it just, to me, it didn't feel like the most original thing I've seen. It just it does hit some of those similar beats. Not in a bad way, but just not the most original. However, I give it the max for execution. I give it 5 points for execution because I don't think there's anything this movie could have done better as far as what it's trying to do, accomplishing its goals, the way it looks, the way it feels. Everything is perfect. The acting, everything's just, everybody's at the top of their game. And it comes across, especially on the, like, I'm lucky I got to see on the big screen this year. It really, really pops on the big screen. So that's an 8.5 total for me.
And so to kind of revisit how this category is decided, I have recently started experimenting with splitting the category between the originality and execution that Scott just mentioned. That's not settled in stone, although I have put it on the guest outline. So I appreciate you going in that regard. And I will also split the category as well here. But this is kind of how audacious is the film? Was it necessarily, I guess, ahead of its time would be more for classicness, but something that redefined something is a little bit of a unique factor to it? Is it a somewhat of a unicorn of a film? And under some of those standards, I think a lot of what we think of with novelty is the originality of the idea. This is somewhat playing on a lot of the film noir detective mysteries from the 40s, 50s, even back to the 30s that we were familiar with. And that's why, while it's playing on that, I do think it has its own style, its own flair. It creates the quote unquote neo noir format and redefines a genre, which I think does continue into a modern element, even if they aren't really using this level of artistry to tell these types of stories. The plot is also darker. It's more twisted, and it's befitting a time when Watergate was the biggest story of the time. So I have a 4 from the originality standpoint. On an execution standpoint, though, I guess it still needs time for it to grow on me a little bit. Nicholson is great with his acting. Obviously, I nominated him for my best performance. The script being taught at film school, I think people would have to explain that to me, given that there's a narration that was edited out. There are certain lines that weren't necessarily part of the original script, and the ending was changed. I mean, are we looking at the final script or are we working at the working script? I guess I wonder in some regards how that goes. I also don't know if I'm quite as high on the cinematography and the look of the film as some other people. It's a little bit muted. Like, I don't have a problem with the way it looks, but it just doesn't quite pop for me in the way that certain other films of this era kind of do. I mean, you're comparing it against some of the greatest all-time looking films ever, and it has a little bit where I would comment, just from my taste, it doesn't quite pop in the way that like Jaws does, or even The Godfather. I think those are just slightly a little bit better in those regards. So if I'm going to quibble over this a little bit on an execution standpoint, I'm going to go with a 4. And so 4 and 4 for a total of 8.
If I'm looking at this and I'm looking at the novelty in the initial, which is the concept, I'm giving it out of, out of 5 points, I'm giving it 2, because it is a well-worn concept. If execution also, as far as I'm concerned, means enjoyment, because there's things that are artistic and then there are things that are just plain enjoyable. I enjoyed this film a lot, and how fresh it was, a fresh look at it, even though the concepts were all pretty worn and tried and true. So I'm going to give it a few points up for that. So I'm going to go with probably a 4 for the concept or for the enjoyment level and execution. I'm going with a 6 overall.
Gotta ruin the average.
That's my job.
Make the math more difficult.
Always. That's why you have a calculator, right?
That is correct. So we also will have a 7.5 average in this category as well. Classicness. Dad, I will let you lead.
This has a lot of points up because of the time frame, fact that we have a very strong central female character, the storyline in general. But I have to give it a little bit down for kind of the stereotype of Chinatown being a reminiscent of chaos. The Polanski factor takes it down. I also have to take down, I understand again the time frame and such, but Nicholson's slapping of Dunaway in the film does kind of bother me a bit. And then the incest component of this, I know that it's the vehicle by which it's supposed to ultimately show the level of control and why there's such angst throughout this film that you can't really understand or portray. So, taking into account that the criticism shouldn't overall distract from it, since we started as 7, all the things that I found distracted or detracted from it, I should say, I went with a 6 for classicness overall.
I find this category to be extremely difficult on this film. Obviously, there's the things that are not the fault of the film. It's the fault of the people that made it. But obviously, being the most closely associated film with Polanski and his legal troubles that we've now mentioned on multiple occasions during the course of the show, is that worth -2 points, -3 points? I mean, I'm not sure where to grade that out. On the standpoint of physically slapping, Faye Dunaway. Is that something that is distasteful? Was it necessary to include it in that moment? Maybe, because it is a conversation between Jake and someone else, and it is reminiscent of a time where that was acceptable practice. You could just pick up and throw around and slap women in public, even with absolutely no consequences. Nobody would think really much of it. And I think a lot of the other violence that we see during the course of the film, the domestic violence by Curly to his wife, is off screen, but is reminiscent of a time where men were far superior to women in just about every way. And this is a power dynamic film. So, from its themes, extending that, what is distasteful and what is relevant. I found a very difficult line to try and cross between all of those things. I do think this film is somewhat timeless, which I usually give points up for. And I do think it still has modern relevancy due to the power dynamics discussed in the themes of the film. So, with that, I think this is somewhat more of a byproduct of not knowing how to grade out Polanski's association with the film than anything else. But I had it also at a 6. And I feel very pained to say that.
What you said about it being timeless is actually something that I wrote down too. I was like, the fact it's timeless quality really helps it a lot in this category. I would say I also give it a lot of credit for being ahead of its time. I talked about this a little bit before in the way it combines old Hollywood and new Hollywood with some darker themes and a downbeat ending. It brings that into play, which I don't think was, I mean, there are downbeat endings in old noir movies, but this one really, like you said, leaves the pit in your stomach. But I did docket points for that long Asian joke, which I thought was just, I know it was a joke that it was long, but it was just forever. That joke was long. Also, just some of the smaller things like old-fashioned humor, Jake mocking the way the gardener says grass, the Asian gardener, just some of that stuff was a little bit, I couldn't really get behind that. Although, aside from those small things, I think it held up decently well as far as sidestepping any really offensive stuff. I mean, I've seen a lot worse in movies from this time. You have to kind of give movies like this a little bit of a leniency just because of the time period. And then my thing with the Polanski thing is I know it taints it. I try to not to let it for me. It just doesn't. It's just my own personal thing where I just try to separate it as much as I can, even though it's hard to do. I ended up in an 8, finally.
So that's going to be a 6.67 average between the three of us. Finally, we get to rewatchability. I will let Scott lead here as well.
My score is 9 out of 10. I get more of it every time. I get more out of it every time I see it. I've seen it 3 times. I know I'll watch it more. I think it's extremely rewatchable just because the pacing of it moves fast. It kind of doesn't handhold you. It expects you to keep up. Once you've kind of got the groundwork laid of the plot, you can kind of start to focus on other aspects of the movie, which are so well crafted and done. It's just, for me, it's like watching a new movie every time I watch it. And I've watched it twice this year, and both times I felt like I was watching a different movie. And I've also been surprised by it every time I've watched it. So for me, that really makes it high on the watchability scale. There's just a lot of things to savor in this movie. A lot of attention and care went into it. So yeah, I ended up being a 9 for that.
This is a film that I want to rewatch, and I want to rewatch it more than just occasionally. I'd like to put it into kind of, at least for now, into the loop of things that I would like to watch about once every year. Simply because I have a feeling it's kind of Onion-esque in that each time you watch it, you delve through one layer, you're going to find more in it that you didn't see or think about before. Is this something that I'm going to go really like gung-ho and like push to have somebody watch it with me on a weekend where, it's like your mother and I mean, no matter how many times I ask, I can't imagine my mother watching this film your mother watching this film very often, if at all, because.
Well, it's starring Jack Nicholson, and she doesn't like Nicholson.
Yeah.
That'll do it.
And so to that extent, I'm not going to say this is one of my all-time favorites, although I really enjoyed the film. So I'm going to go with an 8.5 for rewatchability. which is a high number for me usually.
I've introduced that I have a new kind of set spectrum for a couple of these categories over the last few weeks. And rewatchability, we've often decided on the Kieran B test whether you would put this on of your own volition and whether you'd keep it on once it's actually on, or if you would keep it on if you find it on somewhere. Now, the only case in which I would think that this is on for anybody is probably if you're just flipping through and you see TCM and you're one of the film nerds who stops and will watch anything that you are just generally familiar with or have, some level of affection for. What I plan to think of myself doing is this is not one where I'm going to be racing home to rewatch it again, but I can very much see myself intentionally rewatching this maybe next year, maybe 2 years from now, and feeling like I haven't quite gotten everything out of it yet that I want to. So revisiting it intentionally every couple of years is something that I could very easily see myself doing. It's just not going to be something that is always a favorite until it probably hits me on the third, fourth, fifth time or something like that, where maybe it will finally just turn that extra revolution for me. But due to the fact of my intentionality of planning in the next few years or so to go back and rewatch it, I have about a 4 on that range because I'm making a specific plan to go and watch it if I find it on somewhere. And so for me, I'm sitting at about a 7. So that would mean it's an 8.17 average between the three of us. For audience score, we had an 81% for Google users and a 93% for Rotten Tomato users, giving us an 8.7. So to repeat the categories, we had a 7.5 for legacy, an 8.33 for impact and significance, a 7.5 for novelty, a 6.67 for classicness, an 8.17 for rewatchability, and an 8.7 for audience score, giving us a final total of 46.87, and currently placing it on our list between Iron Man and Elf at number 98.
Yeah.
You can laugh. It's okay. This show has always made odd bedfellows. As always, if you have any disagreements with our scores or anything in our arguments for why we scored something, if you agree with us in any regard and just would like to give us kudos, you can email us at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. You can find us on our website, ronnieduncanstudios.com/gmotepodcast, or you can get with us on any of our socials at gmotepodcast. That would be Instagram, X, Twitter, Letterboxd, and YouTube. Remaining questions for this one. I will start here. Who hired Ida Sessions and why was she killed? I know there's the allusion in the middle of the film that it was supposedly the assistant to Mulwray, but I think that was just him projecting something so that he could figure it out. Much in the same way, if you've played the game Clue, you often ask about two of the things that you already know can be eliminated because they're in your own hand and you just want an extra detail. So you force a certain card in order to eliminate it as a possibility.
For me, I think it was Cross because I think he was trying to smoke out where the sister/daughter was.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my
That's
most
what I
likely
thought, too.
guess, yeah.
And she was killed because, again, it's Cross. And to paraphrase the mobster Sam Giancana, dead men tell no tales.
Yeah. And she had figured out the real estate scam with the old folks home. She figured she was onto that because she gave Jake the tip on that. So I think she just knew too much, like you're saying. Yeah, that's what it was.
All right. Number 2. Why was a cop firing a gun into a crowded street at 100 yards? And did he have the legal right to do so? I know it's the LAPD. They have the legal right, apparently, to do just about anything they want to do, even in the 1930s. But come on, really?
That was insane.
I
Yeah.
never batted an eye.
I would have. It would have
just
made
the time
less.
frame.
It would have made less of an argument for me if he hit her on like the first shot, even the second shot where she's like 20, 25 yards. But when she's getting towards the end of that street and he's hitting her through the eye from behind, okay.
Did you guys like the horn foreshadowing? Like early in the movie when they're in her driveway, when Nicholson sneaked into her car, she's upset and lays down on the horn and it honks. And then at the end, she's laying on the horn and it honks. Yeah.
Didn't catch.
That was a little bit of foreshadowing. I only caught it the second time, so that's why. Yeah.
Cool.
Because I knew what was coming.
Any remaining questions for either of you?
I'm good.
No.
Okay. So then I have a few more. What happens to Catherine?
Well, I kind of know because I watched the two Jakes.
Ah.
Without saying too much, she does factor into the plot of the two Jakes a little bit. Yeah.
Okay. So the open-ended question is go watch the sequel that people like less.
Yeah. That was made 16 years later by Jack Nicholson. Yeah.
All right. Then how did Cross move Mulwray's body and clean up the scene without anyone seeing him at Mulwray's home?
Because he's Cross. He's got that kind of power.
Until they found his glasses, I was like, I hope they reveal that he had one of his guys do that. I was like, it seems hard to believe that he drowned him, a much younger man, in that pool. But I guess we're supposed to believe that. Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, he isn't, I don't know. I thought it would make more sense if he had like the Roman Polanski character do that, take care of that for him. But I don't know. It seemed like it was a heat of the moment passion thing too. So maybe he was just like unusually strong that day.
I mean, it's possible. I wonder why Evelyn wasn't at home, why the servants were not there for an extended period of time. Like, it just seems very coincidental that you could move the body and clean up the scene, especially if he struck his head and was bleeding anywhere in a 1930s sense without having a lot of time.
Yeah. Especially since the gardener is very in tune to what's happening in that pool and what's going on with that pool.
What do you think the significance of the title Chinatown is?
Again, it's a euphemism for chaos and things you don't understand, and kind of a cover. Things you don't understand it and you don't want to know anything more about it.
Yeah. Things you just can't do anything about. And again, like it does parallel with him laying in bed talking kind of cryptically about a girl he tried to help in Chinatown and didn't work out. Same thing happens at the end. It's all kind of tied into that, I feel like.
So apparently from the internet here, the film's enigmatic title is a metaphor for moral corruption by unseen forces. Throughout the film, Jake Gittes refers to his time as a police officer in Chinatown, where you can't always tell what's going on. In Hollywood, the movie's line, "Forget it, Jake, it's Chinatown," has become a mantra for those who have been burned or snubbed by the entertainment industry. The implication being that it's better left to let it go than make an issue of it, because that's just how the industry works.
Mm-hmm. That's also sort of interesting because earlier in the movie, when they're questioning Evelyn, the first time the police are, she just goes along with Jake's scheme. And then when they get back outside, she goes along with it saying, yes, I hired him to look after my husband or whatever. Then when they get back in the car, she's like, thanks for going along with me. I just didn't feel like explaining everything. It's sort of like, just go along with it. Don't try to rock the boat. Just go along with it. Yeah. I feel like there's kind of a parallel there.
And then we have one listener question from a mutual acquaintance, one Andrew Corns of the Revisionist Almanac. This is a larger Jack question, but just how incredible was that run of his from 69 through 80? It's got to be one of the best of any actor in a 10-ish year span, right? Now, I did correct him, and since we're in the habit of mischaracterizing people's questions, I would say that given that The Shining was a bomb at the time that it came out, there's a period from about, I think, 75 through about 81, 82, where Jack did nothing of significance at the public at the time. It's only years after that The Shining became what it now is. So I would limit this actually from about 69 through 75. And I've already likened that there are many other runs that I would make comparable associations to. Bogart from about 41 through 54 to me is like a legendary run. You could look at Cary Grant from about 41 through about 59, I think would be an appropriate amount of time. You could look at
Even 63 because of Charade.
I look at North by Northwest as like kind of the capper on the majority of his career. I guess from about Philadelphia Story through about North by Northwest for me, you could look at one of the great careers. You could look at Pacino's 70s, where he had that 4-year run with Godfather, Serpico, Godfather 2, and Dog Day Afternoon in 4 consecutive films. I've already said that the legendary John Gazelle with his movie run during the 70s is unheralded.
Yeah.
So there are many. De Niro during the 80s is pretty exceptional. Or even, from about 73 for Mean Streets through about 1980, he's in a lot of great films. So I don't think that this is by itself exceptional, but it is still one of the great all-time actor runs for someone to be in 5 or 6 great films pretty steadily from almost a year to year to year basis.
Okay, Jack took that clout from winning the Oscar to take a few years to develop his directorial debut, a very strange movie called Going South, which came out in 78. If you've ever seen it, it's a very weird movie, but it was definitely a blank check period for him. Like he can do whatever he wants in Hollywood. I'm going to make this movie.
Well, I was also going to comment about Dustin Hoffman between 67 and 84 with Rain Man.
Rain Man's 88.
88, excuse me. But I mean,
and I think there are a lot of gaps in between there where from like The Graduate to about All the President's Men and Marathon Man, there's not a huge, I mean, I know we did Midnight Cowboy, but he's got some big spaces where it's not. I would say actually Hoffman from 60 or 76 when he does President's Men and Marathon Man, Kramer versus Kramer, and then Tootsie to Rain Man is probably a better run for him. Yeah. Another one I'll throw out there is one of the all-time actor runs, Harrison Ford in the 80s.
Yeah.
I mean, 3 Indiana Jones films. What was it? Witness, Working Girl, and 2 Star Wars films. I mean, wow.
Yeah.
Jane Fonda in the 70s. You got 2 Best Actress Oscars there. She had a good run.
Yeah, certainly.
And then Jodie Foster, I guess, too.
So I don't think it's unusual for people to put out good quality work year after year after year in a short period of time. It's the longevity of putting out certain things of quality over a career or even a larger span than even 5 to maybe even 10 years that I find to be a little bit more exceptional or unicorn-like. So I'm sorry that we kind of generally disagree with the premise a little bit and undercut the question, but we appreciate you, Andrew, of course. I want to thank our guest for being here with us. Scott, thank you very much. Again, where can people find you if they have enjoyed your work this evening?
Yes, I am on Twitter and Instagram at Cole, Scott, all spelled out. And you can find me, my writings at the Movie Friends podcast, their website. I've been on the show too, so you can hear me there. And I appreciate you guys having me on. It's been fun.
Yes, and an open invitation anytime you'd like to come back. If you do get to the 5 guest appearance mark, you do earn one of our hats that I am currently modeling for us. So we have a 5-timers club. You will also get a badge on the website that is specific to you, and we can work some things out. I know that we haven't quite opened up scheduling for next year, and there are only a few guest spots left because our resident Scooby-Doo villain has pretty much filled our guest roster through the end of this year. But nonetheless, well, I'm sure if you would like to come back, we'll find a space for you.
Thanks.
Otherwise, Dad, remaining thoughts for the week. I know that you wanted to interject something on Unfrosted.
Yes, I know that the reviews on this have been horrible, and a lot of people have deadpanned it. I, myself, thought it was funny and cute and highly entertaining. Is it a highly quality film, something that's going to be artistic and last or survive? No. But for my generation who grew up with all the breakfast food cereals and Tony the Tiger and all that, I thought it was funny. I thought that some of the performances were great. I thought that having Hugh Grant as Tony the Tiger was a great casting, and I enjoyed it. So it's one of those that you can just pop in, and you don't have to really watch that closely. But it's a great, just if you want to chuckle here and there. I thought it was funny.
I gotta watch it. I haven't seen it, but I'm glad to hear that you liked it. I need to check it out.
And now that everyone has canceled us for that opinion, as the Film Bro community actively throws up on our Twitter feed, I bid you adieu for this week. That'll do it for us this week. Thank you so much for listening. Have you ever danced with the devil in the pale moonlight? Next week for our 216th episode, we welcome back returning guest Terry Bartley of the Most Writers Are Fans podcast and new guest Adam Freed, a senior film critic at moviearcher.com, to discuss one of the seminal comic book films of all time for its 35th anniversary, Batman from 1989. Directed by Tim Burton, written by Sam Hamm and Walter Scarron. Music by Danny Elfman, starring Jack Nicholson, Michael Keaton, and Kim Basinger. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at thenewRonnieDuncanStudios.com or at greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com. Find us on YouTube, Instagram, X, Letterboxd, or TikTok at the handle @GMODPodcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our technical provider and distributor is Captivate FM.